It was a bright afternoon, and the city streets were alive with people going about their day. Among the bustling crowd was an elderly black woman in a wheelchair, slowly making her way down the sidewalk. Her gentle smile and warm presence seemed to light up the path ahead. She was simply heading home after a peaceful afternoon at the market, until everything changed. Out of nowhere, a heated encounter erupted. A uniformed police officer, towering over the frail woman, suddenly began confronting her in a way that no one expected. Raised voices echoed, and bystanders froze in shock as the situation escalated far too quickly. The tension in the air was palpable, and the woman's frailty made the scene even more distressing. What the officer didn't know was that just a few blocks away, someone was already heading in their direction, someone who would change everything. Her son, a highly trained and respected FBI agent, had always dedicated his life to protecting justice and standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. He never imagined he'd have to do so for his own mother on a day that started so peacefully. The moment their paths crossed, the atmosphere shifted. What happened next was a powerful reminder that appearances can be deceiving and justice can prevail in the most unexpected ways. Stay with us as we take you through every gripping detail of this shocking encounter, the unexpected twist that left everyone stunned, and the powerful lesson it holds for all of us. This is a story of courage, accountability, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. Trust me, you won't want to miss a second of what happens next. The officer's voice was sharp and commanding, drawing even more attention from those passing by. The elderly woman, clearly shaken, tried to explain herself, but her words seemed lost in the chaos. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. Despite her fear, there was a dignity about her that couldn't be ignored. A few onlookers exchanged concerned glances, unsure whether to step in or keep their distance. Moments like these were complicated. No one wanted to make things worse, but watching in silence didn't feel right either. The city had seen enough tense encounters between civilians and law enforcement to know how quickly things could spiral. Meanwhile, her son was just around the corner, walking at a brisk pace. His sharp eyes scanned the street, trained to pick up on even the smallest signs of trouble. What he saw made his heart race. The sight of his mother, vulnerable and seemingly at the center of a confrontation, was enough to ignite every protective instinct he had. This wasn't just any man in a suit. This was someone who had spent years dismantling criminal operations and navigating dangerous situations. But nothing could have prepared him for seeing his own mother in distress like this. As he moved closer, his mind raced with questions. What had happened? Why was this officer even speaking to her in such a harsh tone? The crowd grew, whispering among themselves. Some had their phones out, recording the scene, unsure of what might happen next. The tension was thick, hanging over the street like a dark cloud. The officer, seemingly unaware of the growing audience, continued his demands, his stance rigid. But the old woman held her ground, her voice steady now despite the circumstances. She knew her son would be there soon. He always showed up when it mattered most. And when he did, everything would change. The officer's stance remained firm, his face set in stone as he continued his demands. "I need to see some identification," he barked, his tone filled with authority. The elderly woman, though clearly uneasy, met his gaze with quiet defiance. Her voice, steady but polite, responded, "I just came from the market. I haven't done anything wrong." The officer's eyes flicked toward the bags resting on her lap, suspicion lingering in the air. The onlookers whispered, some shaking their heads in disapproval while others simply watched, unsure of how this would unfold. Tensions like these had become all too common, and many people carried the weight of past moments where things had gone horribly wrong. "You always have been," he said, the pride clear in his voice. As the SUV continued its journey, the weight of the day began to lift. They had faced something unexpected, but they had also stood together through it. The mother realized that while her son's badge and training gave him authority, it was his unwavering sense of right and wrong that truly defined him. I hope that officer learns something from this, she said thoughtfully. He will, her son assured her. Sometimes people just need to be reminded that respect and accountability go hand in hand. The vehicle slowed as they approached a familiar neighborhood. The son glanced at his mother with a soft smile. "Let's get you home," he said. As they pulled into her driveway, the city lights fading behind them, the mother felt a sense of peace. Despite the chaos of the day, there was something comforting about knowing that justice, even when tested, could prevail. And as for her son, she knew he would always be there, not just as an agent of the law, but as her greatest protector. Officer Grant's confidence flickered for the first time. He glanced toward the front, then back at Angela. His grip tightened on his belt. This wasn't going how he expected. But it wasn't over yet, not even close, because what no one in that station realized was that this was about to get much, much bigger. And by the time it was over, they'd all regret the moment they'd put those handcuffs on Angela Carter. The room fell silent. The officers exchanged uneasy glances as the lawyer set his briefcase down with a sharp click. He adjusted his tie, his expression unreadable. Then, in a calm but cutting voice, he spoke. "I need to see Angela Carter, now." Officer Grant hesitated, but before he could answer, Lisa stepped forward, her phone still recording. "You've been lying this whole time," she said, her voice filled with anger. "She's here, and now the world knows it." A murmur rippled through the room. The front desk officer's hand hovered over his keyboard, unsure what to do next. More people in the lobby had started watching, whispering. A few even raised their own phones, capturing the moment. In the cell, Angela heard every word. She knew the tide had shifted, but she wasn't done yet. Grant turned to the lawyer, his jaw tight. "We don't have to answer to you." A slow smirk spread across the lawyer's face. "Actually, you do," he replied. "I just spoke with the judge. Unless you want a lawsuit that shuts this place down, I suggest you let her go." He paused, letting the words sink in. Immediately, the tension snapped. A higher-ranking officer rushed out from the back, his face pale. He took one look at the lawyer, then at the people filming, and made a decision. "Let her out," he ordered. Grant's nostrils flared, but he didn't argue. He stormed toward Angela's cell, yanked the keys from his belt, and unlocked the door with jerky, frustrated movements. Angela stepped forward, her wrists still red from the cuffs. But she didn't look defeated, she looked powerful. Lisa ran to her side, relief washing over her. But before they could leave, Angela turned back to Grant. "You should be worried," she said quietly, "because this isn't over." Grant scoffed, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Then, just as Angela and Lisa stepped outside, Lisa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. Angela noticed this shift in her expression. "What?" Lisa turned the screen toward her. A news alert flashed across the top. *** breaking. Video of unlawful arrest goes viral. FBI reportedly investigating. ***. Angela exhaled slowly. The fight wasn't just hers anymore. It had just begun. Angela stared at the screen, her heart pounding. It had only been minutes since she stepped out of that police station, and already the world was watching. People were talking. The officers who had humiliated her, denied her a phone call, and treated her like she didn't matter were now at the center of a national conversation. Lisa scrolled through the comments under the viral video. Thousands of people were demanding answers. News outlets were picking up the story. Lawyers, activists, and even public officials were weighing in. The system that had tried to silence Angela had just made her voice louder than ever. Angela took a deep breath, letting it sink in. She wasn't just another forgotten case. She wasn't going to be brushed aside like they had hoped. She had fought back, and now the truth was out. As she and Lisa walked to the car, Angela's lawyer joined them. "They messed with the wrong person," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't over. We'll make sure of that." Angela nodded. She had already decided she wasn't letting this slide. Not for herself, But for the countless others who had been through the same thing and never got justice, she would press charges, she would demand accountability, and she would make sure no one forgot what happened that night. But for now, she allowed herself a small moment of relief. She was free, she wasn't broken, and most importantly, she wasn't alone. As Lisa started the car, Angela glanced back at the station one last time. Officer Grant stood in the doorway, watching them leave, his face unreadable. He knew his career, his reputation, everything he had taken for granted was now hanging by a thread. Angela turned away. She had bigger things to focus on now. As they drove off, Lisa smiled. "You know, this is just the beginning, right?" Angela looked out the window, watching as the city lights blurred past. A slow smile crossed her face. "I know," she said, "and I'm ready." Her son, now just feet away, slowed his pace, analyzing the scene with the precision of someone trained to spot threats. His mind processed the situation rapidly, the officer's rigid posture, the crowd forming a ring of silent witnesses, and most importantly, his mother's expression. She was holding her ground, but he could see the strain behind her calm demeanor. He knew better than to rush in recklessly, even though every fiber of his being demanded he do just that. Years of FBI experience taught him that timing and strategy were everything. But this was personal, and that made it infinitely harder to stay composed. From the officer's perspective, she was just another civilian refusing to comply. What he didn't realize was the gravity of his mistake, not just because of who her son was, but because of the truth hidden beneath this entire situation. The story unfolding here wasn't as simple as a misunderstanding on the street. As the son stepped closer, his presence commanded immediate attention. The officer's gaze shifted, momentarily caught off guard by the man's confident stride and sharp eyes. The bystanders sensed the change too, their murmurs growing louder. But this wasn't the moment for conclusions. Not yet. There were still layers to peel back, questions to be answered, and a confrontation that hadn't reached its boiling point. The son's voice cut through the thick tension, low but firm. "Is there a problem here, officer?" The officer's head turned sharply toward the man now standing at his mother's side. There was something about him, the calm but commanding presence, the way he spoke without raising his voice, yet demanded attention. The officer stiffened, clearly sensing that this wasn't an ordinary bystander stepping in. "Who are you?" the officer asked, his tone shifting to one of cautious authority. The son's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. "I'm her son," he said plainly, his voice steady. "And I'd like to know why you're harassing my mother." The crowd edged closer, the air thick with anticipation. Phones were still recording, capturing every second of this escalating encounter. The tension was palpable, hanging over the scene like a storm ready to break. The officer's eyes darted between the mother and son, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "She was acting suspiciously," he said, though the conviction in his voice wavered. "I have the right to ask questions." The son took a slow breath, reining in the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Years of FBI training had taught him how to navigate high-stress situations, but this was different. This was his mother, and every instinct told him to protect her at all costs. "She's a senior citizen in a wheelchair," he said, his voice firm but measured. "Suspicious of what exactly? Buying groceries?" The officer shifted uncomfortably, aware that the eyes of the crowd were now scrutinizing his every move. But pride and authority can be a dangerous combination, and he wasn't ready to back down. "You don't get to question how I do my job," the officer snapped, trying to reclaim control of the situation. The son's eyes hardened. "Actually," he said calmly, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I think you'll find that I do." The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The officer's face tensed, sensing that this encounter was slipping far beyond his control. What came next would change everything, leaving the onlookers and even the officer himself stunned beyond belief. The officer's eyes narrowed as the son calmly pulled out a sleek black leather wallet and flipped it open. The crowd, already buzzing with curiosity, leaned in closer. The gleam of an official FBI badge caught the afternoon light, silencing the murmurs instantly. For a brief moment, it felt like time stood still. The officer's face paled. His jaw clenched as he processed the new information. The very person he had been trying to intimidate was the mother of a federal agent, one who clearly wasn't going to let this situation slide. The tables had turned, and everyone knew it. But just as the officer opened his mouth, presumably to justify his actions, the sharp screech of tires filled the air. Heads whipped around as an unmarked black SUV pulled up to the curb. The doors swung open, and two men in dark suits stepped out with purposeful strides. Their expressions were unreadable, but their presence was commanding. The son's eyes flicked toward them, instantly recognizing his own agency's operatives. His voice dropped to a warning tone as he addressed the officer. "Looks like you've got more company than you bargained for."